You're listening to Under the Shell Podcast, the best in America.
Welcome to Under the Shell, presented by Testudo Times. I'm Brendan YSL.
Sam Jane.
Michael Howes. And this week's guest is the pitching coach for Maryland baseball. They had a tough series loss the past weekend at Michigan, but he's going to talk all about it here. Welcome on, Jimmy Jackson. Our next guest is Maryland baseball pitching coach Jimmy Jackson. Coach Jackson, thank you for coming on.
I appreciate you having me.
Starting with the most recent news, coming off that weekend series loss to Michigan, but you guys have won 20 of the first 28 games. Kind of, how do you evaluate how the season's gone so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were all disappointed with how the weekend went, of course. But like we were talking about in the airport a little bit, I mean, if before the season started, you told us we were going to be 28-8 and 500 after the first couple weekends, it's like, hey, we're going to be doing pretty well if that's the case. I think we knew we were going to be good going into the season, but with so many new players and half the coaching staff being new as well as myself, it's, you just kind of never really know. You don't really have much to judge off of when you lose the top half of your lineup, your entire weekend rotation. Guys are filling roles left and right. I feel like it was kind of inevitable. We were going to have a bad weekend sooner or later. And if that's our worst weekend and we still take one on the road, that's still pretty solid.
Do you feel like that streak was maybe a little bit of a distraction or in the back of players' minds, or was the series loss just good adversity to have as conference play is starting?
Yeah, I think that's all it was. I mean, I know our guys were aware of it, but to be honest, I mean, there's a very small handful of players that actually participated in all those weekends, let alone in the roles that they're being asked to play in now. So I know it was in the back of guys' minds because it was pretty cool. It's like having a hitting streak or a win streak or whatever. I don't think it necessarily put any type of added pressure on our guys. I mean, that's one thing I think we do so well here with Coach Swope is, we ourselves as coaches don't put much pressure on our guys as it is. I think they get to play pretty relaxed, and it seems to work pretty well. I just think it was a bad weekend, to be honest.
So at this point in the season, obviously, pitching coach, how do you evaluate the pitching performances? Currently, while recording, second best ERA in the Big Ten. If you take it back to last year, I think it was fourth worst. So how have you kind of evaluated that turnaround?
Yeah, I mean, I've been very happy with it. I mean, I think the difficult part for me is I'm a really big believer in our main three goals, and I know when we do those things, we give our team a chance to win. And for instance, this weekend, we didn't come close to achieving those three goals. Therefore, we produced not as well on the mound. But it's difficult, I mean, between the travel in this conference, the travel that we've had in general, being on the road so much, and we're going to continue to do so here on out. I have been happy with it, though. I mean, we've had, you have a guy coming from a mid-major pitching at this level on the weekends for us. You got a former reliever pitching at this level, and then a freshman. So basically, three guys pitching on the weekends that have not done it at this level. Our go-to guys out of the pen, again, only one of which has done it at this level. So I've been very pleased with them. It's hard. Like I said, I mean, we had three bad games on the mound as a staff, but as a whole, out of the first 25 games, I don't know, I was pretty happy with like 23 of them. So again, it's not like Coach Swope put it best, I think, at the end of the game when he was talking to the team was, this is just adversity for us. It is what it is. It's not like we're going to go home and say, oh my gosh, we got to change everything. It's just, let's get back to work, figure out what makes us better and what made us good before, and build off that.
Some of those improvements in the pitching, I know I talked to you a little bit about it, the use of the technology, the TrackMan team didn't really use that before. Can you kind of describe how you use the TrackMan to kind of look at the pitching data and help your team?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that, for instance, this weekend, we were able to get that now with all the data sharing stuff we have, and looking back at it, for instance, at one of our weekend guys and seeing how off all of his metrics were, that then told us, okay, something must be off in his delivery in order to throw off every single pitch. His arm angle, his release height, his release slot, everything was different. So then that gave me a chance to then dive into the video even more, look at it a little more closely as to, why would his arm slot be 7 or 8 degrees higher? What threw that off? And then we could go back and we watch video. We actually took a couple clips from Michigan's Twitter on some bad pitches and put that side by side against some good video against Michigan State. And we were able to find, something very, very important. So hopefully if we can get that back on track this week in his bullpen session, he'll be right back to where he was. So yeah, the data stuff is always good. But it's like I told our guys again, the text I sent them today on our off day is, we, at the end of the day, we didn't meet our 3 goals. So if we don't meet any of those 3, we're just not going to win. We're going to have to win 15-12, which is not really how any team should win. So yes, the metrics were off for some guys, but even if they're off, if we pitch ahead, win the first 3 pitches, there's a good chance we give ourselves a chance to win.
Just wanted to ask you about pitch tunneling and or an overlay kind of in the video. How much do you use that? And kind of second part of the question, what do you do with guys who aren't necessarily big data visual learners, right? Like they don't learn that way. They're kind of maybe the more old school pitcher, that type of thing, versus guys who, all they've grown up on is spin rate and whatnot. How do you balance that? And what are your teaching strategies?
Yeah, I think as far as pitch tunneling goes, it's funny because we were actually talking about that in the airport last night and talking about possibly buying something that our hitters use for vision reasons that Swope throws through, possibly incorporating that with our pitchers just as another thing to possibly help a guy or two, and like me and him are always on the same page with this stuff. If we got to buy something that only helps one guy, it's worth it. I don't care if it costs $5,000, it's worth buying because for every player we can help, it's going to help our team. But yeah, it is kind of a fine line between that stuff. There are some guys that if they dive too much into the data and the analytics and the pitch breaks and the spin, they start to get in their own heads, So I think that's where my job comes in to say, okay, it's important to know these things and use these things, but you have to know what works for you. And as we all know, you can't be on the mound thinking about these things anyway. So this is literally just a practice session thing for us. So we're going to use the data. We're going to work on it. We're going to use Portable TrackMan. We're going to overlay some videos to show you that your fastball to this zone and your slider to that zone are what tunnel best. And we do that throughout the year. But there are guys that honestly, it's great because a lot of times they'll just look at me and say, hey man, I don't know what this TrackMan thing is saying. I don't really care. Just tell me what to do. The same way that I allow all of our pitchers to swipe, and change the pitch at any point in time. If they have full conviction in a pitch and it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But the last thing I want you to do is throw a pitch that I told you to throw. You're second guessing it. Therefore, it's probably not going to be good. It's the same way when we practice. If we got TrackMan set up and I'm telling you, hey, we want to manipulate your curveball to this degree, and this is why, and they say, yeah, I don't really want to look at that. You just tell me. Then that's what I do. So I look at it and I keep it away from them. And that's a guy to guy thing. Pitcher to pitcher. It's always going to be different for that type of stuff.
What about as a pitching coach? I know the sweeper's kind of been revolutionary at the MLB level, at least, has been a pitch that's trended to a lot of guys using it. Have you seen anything in the collegiate level, like a pitch or a pitch movement that's really kind of rocketed up these past couple years?
Yeah, I think a lot more guys throw cutters. I don't know if that's because it seems easier for people to coach it or easier for younger players to throw it within the strike zone. I don't really know the exact reason why, to be honest with you, but I know there for a while, a lot of pitching coaches in college were talking about the sweeper and trying to do it, but I think people find out very quickly that it's extremely difficult to do, and you also need the right arm slots to do it with. I think, there's plenty of big leaguers and minor leaguers that were trying to be taught that pitch, and it ended up throwing off all their other stuff because it didn't fit their arsenal. And I think that's always something that's tricky for a college pitcher. The last thing you want to do is mess up a kid's fastball and two seam and their best three pitches because you're trying to add a fourth. I think that's where the fine line comes in for that sort of thing. But yeah, if I had to guess, I would say cutter. I mean, more often than not, I hear more hitting coaches say pitchers we're going to face have a cutter, and I feel like I didn't hear that very often years ago.
I threw a cutter in high school, and it got bombed, so that's why I'm not playing collegiately.
Take me through your decision and kind of your journey to becoming a coach, because I know you played at Shepherd. What kind of made that shift go to playing to coaching?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. I mean, to be honest, I just knew I wanted to do something in baseball because that's the only thing I really like doing. And the only thing I think I even know how to do somewhat. So, I used to joke with my dad all the time. I mean, I can't fix cars. I can't build things. I'm not very handy. So I didn't really know what the heck I was going to do. And I was still playing independent ball a little bit. And I ran into one of my cousins, actually, that his sons were playing at Archbishop Spalding, which is like a powerhouse in the state of Maryland now. Back when I was in high school, they were not very good at baseball. So I was a little taken back, meaning like I didn't know if I really wanted to help out at a not so great program. And he said, no, we're good now. We're good. Like you got to come over and help out. So I started helping out, and then I met the varsity coach who's now the head coach at DeMatha. And back then he had built Spalding into like basically like a state powerhouse, probably a top 5 team in the state. And I just started working with pitchers there because nobody else could. He looked at me and goes, listen, I was a AAA shortstop. I was a hitter. I don't know anything about pitching. I just want them to throw strikes. So, which is what every hitting coach says. So he's like, yeah, man, you do whatever you want. So I kind of fell into it in that sense. And then after I started doing it every day, I just fell in love with it. And I mean, to be honest, I never thought I would like anything better than playing baseball. Like I didn't think I would actually love something as much as I did playing. And it took maybe 1 year into coaching to be like, okay, this is even better than playing baseball.
What about coaching for you was so much better than playing? It's like, what about teaching people did you like more than actually being kind of, I guess, in the spotlight yourself?
Yeah, I think it just came down to helping people. I think that's just kind of the way I was brought up. My mom, my dad were that way. I mean, we had a couple different times when I was growing up, friends of mine lived with us when they had, some issues at home or maybe not even an issue, just, parents had to be gone for a length of time. One was military based. One was just didn't have parents around very often. And it just became normal to me, just helping people. Like, for instance, my dad coached me from T-ball all the way up to like 12 and under, and he didn't know anything about baseball. He knew as much as just watching TV. He just did it because he was one of the parents that said, I'm going to go to my boss at my job and tell him I need to be off at certain times on certain days because we need somebody to coach the team. And the way he was, and again, not with any technical things in baseball, but just the type of person he was with helping kids, especially the ones that weren't very good, I think just kind of it got ingrained in my mind. It got ingrained in my head to where it was like, man, this is pretty cool to see a kid that maybe was thinking about quitting baseball and all of a sudden he can hit the ball and he wants to play again. But then also when I was coaching at Spalding, I started to fall into this where I was coaching, and in that season alone, we had 4 Division I players all in the same grad class, and 4 or 5 other players move on to D2 and D3. And I was finding myself gravitating towards even the best players and going, okay, well, I know he's already 89, 91 and throws strikes, but how can we make him ready for Division I as opposed to just being another freshman that shows up and needs to develop for 2 more years. So I kind of found myself falling into that, wanting to really work even more so, I guess, with the upper end talent. And then that's what kind of got me into college coaching. I just on a whim tried it and said, okay, I'm most coaches do like what Tommy Gardner for us did. What as soon as he gets done playing, he hops right on staff and kind of learns the tricks of the trade and sees from older people around him how to do things. I didn't do that, of course. So I wasn't a volunteer assistant until I guess 4 years out of college, I believe. So I was a little older than most volunteers. But I knew if I was going to try it and going to kind of see if that was the path I wanted to go, I was going to have to do it at that point in time. You know, if I was getting upwards of 30 years old, I probably couldn't take a zero paying job. But being 26 or 5, whatever I was at the time, I could find a way to make it work. But yeah, I mean, I think that's really what it comes back to from a coaching aspect. I genuinely enjoy seeing a kid figure something out and then flourish with it, you know, to where they just kind of take off, or going over video and saying, okay, I think this is it. And then we find out that that's it. You know, we find the answer to make them better.
Going to that collegiate coaching between Fordham and JMU, I believe it's 10 pitchers that were drafted into the MLB that you coached. Is that something that you take pride in, being able to produce that top level talent?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and don't get me wrong. I mean, I think I had very little to do with it as a coach, but at the same time, I think at times you also you help them get out of their own way. You know, for instance, I guess he wasn't the first one, but one of the first ones. It might have been our first one at Fordham, who's pitched in and out of the big leagues now for the last 3 or 4 years. I'll never forget. We had a conversation during his freshman year. He was really, really good for us. He was our best reliever. And we knew he was good enough to start. We just didn't need him to. That was kind of the role we needed. And he never really thought I was doing anything with him with his pitching delivery. And I remember him saying that to me one time, like, well, what else can I do? What else do you want me to do? And it's great because he wanted to learn, he wanted to get better. But I just kept telling him, I said, listen, man, I know I don't know everything. Like, I'm still young, but I swear there's nothing else for you to do. Like, I think now we can learn about pitching in and pitching out and pitching up and down and, you know, maybe adding another pitch if we can do it or something. But I'm telling you, I think your delivery is really good. So what happened was he ended up off on the side going and working with someone in the area. And I found out through one of our other coaches, kind of overheard something. So I brought him in and I said, hey man, what are you doing? Like, we're on throwing schedules and things like that. How did you just randomly throw a bullpen on a day that nobody knew? Like, why are you doing this? And he's like, well, I just thought, there's got to be something I can do. And I'm like, listen, man, you can believe me or not. Like, I can't control what you do, but I'm telling you, your delivery is perfect. Like, it is picture perfect. Like, if I have a son, I'm going to turn on video of you and go throw like this. And he's like, so anyway, he finally ended up believing me. And it was funny because a year or two later, he gets drafted, I think in the 9th or 10th round, whatever. And he got, I think it was the Padres he was originally with. And the coordinator at the time was Mark Pryor. And he threw his first bullpen after signing, and Mark Pryor was there. They have a conversation. He calls me that night and goes, Jimmy, you'll never guess what Mark Pryor just told me. And I said, well, that's cool. You're around Mark Pryor. Like, that's got to be sick. He's like, yeah. But it was awesome. He goes, we threw a 25-pitch fastball bullpen. And you know how good I am with locating. Like, I just dotted 25 pitches. Like, everybody was amazed that, like, how the hell did I go in the 10th round? And I'm like, well, that's good. And I said, what did Mark say? Like, did he say good stuff? And he goes, he looked at me and said, listen, if any of our pitching coaches in our system try to change your delivery, you call me and tell them that I said nobody changes you. You throw exactly the way you're throwing right now. And I was like, oh, so now Mark Pryor said it and you believe him. So I was right. And he goes, yeah, I'm glad you left me alone. And I think that's part of it for coaches too at this level. Like, yes, I want to help them and I want to continuously make them better. There's always something, but it's not always physical that we can help guys get better. Sometimes they got that, sometimes they're pretty good at that. So yeah, I mean, that was like a big learning experience for me that happened to work out in my favor. But at the same time, it kind of proved what I already was thinking of, like, sometimes it's also my job just to get out of their way and help them get out of their own way. to say, hey man, it's not a mechanics thing, it's just let's make our stuff better.
And now you take that philosophy to Maryland. First season here, back in your home state. Was this sort of like a dream job for you to be coaching back here in College Park?
Oh yeah, it definitely was. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, every year, probably since about my second or third year at Siena, I started writing down just personal goals for myself, whether it was within coaching or life or whatever. And I kind of really dove into that through hearing some different things and started to believe that, when you write them down and you read them every day, you got a better chance of achieving them. And it's something I try to preach to our players. But yeah, that was something that, I remember looking back one time. I mean, I've deleted them since, but when I was at Fordham, my main goal was to get into the Mid-Atlantic or the South and be able to, make a living to where if my wife chose not to work, if we had kids, she could choose, she could be home and raise our kids. And, I could basically support us through coaching baseball. I didn't have like a set number or anything like that. And then I ended up getting JMU like a year later, and we achieved that goal, I think, our second year down there. And then since being at JMU, that was really the only goal from there was if I was to leave, which I really got to a place where I didn't have to leave. I always said the only thing that's going to take me away is a Power 5 job that puts us even in a better situation for our family. But it has to be with someone that's well respected and trusted that I know is also going to have my back the way I have the head coach's back. And then I had actually, put in there at one point that if it's the University of Maryland, I'm going, and it was funny because when Swope called me, he was, going through a whole bunch of stuff for about 10 minutes. And then all of a sudden said, listen, I think I'm going to be named the head coach. And if I do, you're coming here. Like, are you in or not? And I'm like, Jesus, that was fast. Like, this is the first time we've ever spoken. I said, yeah. Now it helped because I had already known of him and I knew everybody spoke highly of him. And the little conversations we've had recruiting wise, I knew he was a good person. So I kind of already had those boxes checked. But yeah, I mean, this is without a doubt where I've always wanted to be, secretly. I mean, I never told anybody that. I didn't even tell my wife that. Even when I mentioned it to her, she's like, really? Like, I mean, she doesn't know college athletics or anything like we do. She just, of course, knew I was from here, but she knows I didn't play here or anything. But it was funny the way it worked out because I never really envisioned it happening. I think it was 2 pitching coaches ago. So I guess it's longer than that because he was here longer than that. So maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when Vaughn had taken over, I didn't know Rob at all. I had just seen him recruiting a little bit. I was really hoping back then that I was going to get a chance to come here, but I didn't. We didn't even talk and we didn't know each other. And then when he left, when that pitching coach left, I'm like, man, like, hopefully I talked to Vaughn because I'll go there in a minute. And he actually did reach out and we spoke, but at the time, the situation just didn't make sense. The way the shuffling of the coaching positions were going to work, it wasn't even like a real in-depth conversation at that point. It just wasn't going to be feasible. But it was nice to at least have that conversation. That was the first time that Maryland was actually like, oh, damn, like that was close. Like that, that was almost a thing. So when Swope called, it was, I was leaving. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I second guessed it a couple times just because we had a nice setup where we were and things like that with our kids. But I kept going back to like, this is a no-brainer,
One really quick one for you, Coach. Is Matt Swope? Rob Vaughn crept into my mind there for a sec. Is Matt Swope? Do we think it's like a forever job for him? And just in your opinion, knowing him.
I think so. I mean, the way he is, I mean, the things he talks about with just the state of Maryland and Baltimore and D.C. and the way he grew up, where he grew up, I don't imagine how anybody could get him away from here. I really don't. We were joking about it on our trip. He was like, of course, the Orioles open up when we're on the road. because if not, I'd be at Pickles right now. And I'm like, what? I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, yeah, man, I go to opening day every year. I'm like, really? Like, damn, I just haven't had a chance to do many fun things while I've coached in college. And I think he's really lucked out in that sense, but well earned. Like, him only being here as a coach, like, he's kept his close friends from high school, his close friends from college, his mom and dad are here. Like, I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine somebody talking him out of leaving here. I really don't.
Unless he gets an MLB job, which at that point I think Maryland fans would be okay with, right?
Yeah, and I mean, and if it's an MLB job, it would have to be the manager or hitting coach for the Orioles. And I don't see him. I don't see him moving away from here. I really don't. You know,
Right.
it's weird. All the guys that I've coached for so far either grew up exactly where they were coaching or really close to where they were coaching. So, like, Coach Rossi at Siena is from Schenectady. Schenectady is 15 minutes from Latham, which is where Siena is. Kevin Layton lived a town over from the town he grew up in coaching at Fordham. Ike was the furthest away from home, but he was in the same state 2 hours from the town he grew up in. Like, Coach Ike at JMU he grew up in Richmond, then he went to VMI, which is 2 hours away down here, and then he coached at William & Mary back over here. Then he went back to VMI as the head coach, and then went to JMU. He's been in the same 2 hour radius for the 50 years he's been alive. Like, and Swope's done the same thing as a coach. Which I've really lucked out with that. The problem is I was never the one that was close to home until now.
Well, thank you so much, Coach Jackson. We really appreciate it. Awesome to hear your insight. And as we head into baseball season, can't wait to see how the Dirty Terps turn out and how your pitching staff looks in year one. So thanks again so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. Thank you very much.
And that was Coach Jimmy Jackson once again. Thank you so much for your time. I'm sure it's a very busy schedule of baseball season here, but kind of getting to the recent news now. The streak is over of Maryland's Big Ten series wins, 23 straight, dating back to 2021, over 1,000 days. But like he said, it was going to have to end at some point, and I think it's going to serve as some good adversity for the team to kind of move on from going forward. A little bit of I'd say inconsistent performances on the mound and from the bats for Maryland this past weekend. They struggled with their starting pitching. Saturday, Logan Coaster couldn't make it past the second inning, gave up 8 runs on 6 hits in that inning. It wasn't very characteristic of his reliable performances this season. Maryland also had their worst offensive performance yet. Then they only put up 1 run, their season low. And then Sunday, it was more of the same. They hit a couple home runs in the middle of the game to tie it and even take the lead, but couldn't get much going. Only scored 4 runs compared to Michigan's 9. The Wolverines, they put up it was 5 runs off of Alex Walsh and Omar Melendez off of 2 home runs down there in the stretch, which kind of blew the game open there. But Coach Jackson mentioned it. Coach Swope mentioned it post game. This is the first time they faced adversity, and it's about how they're going to respond to this. And it's going to define their season.
Mike, put this record in perspective to me. How ridiculous is it that it ended, and how ridiculous is it that it lasted so long?
It's very ridiculous it lasted so long. And Coach Jackson mentioned it. A lot of the people who contributed to that record, the Matt Shaws, the Nick LaRussos, the Luke Schligers, they're not on the team anymore. This was like a part of Maryland baseball history. It was the longest active record in the Big Ten at that time, but it was going to have to end at some point. Records always are going to end. It just happened to end at Michigan on Easter Sunday.
So is this weekend the start of a new record because they play Indiana coming up? Indiana was supposed to be one of the top teams in the Big Ten entering the country. Entering the year, right, Mike? If I'm not correct.
Yep, they were in the preseason top 25. They're in there for a couple of the first few weeks. They're also top 2 ranked team preseason in the Big Ten.
Yeah, so there you go. But that has not lived to be the case necessarily. The Hoosiers have struggled a little bit this season. They are currently ranked 111th in RPI. They're 13-13, 4-3 in conference. Seems like a nice spot for the Terps to kind of bounce back. Indiana obviously has talent. They were good last year. What are you looking forward to this week at the Shell?
I'll say that Indiana, they played some really good teams in their non-conference schedule. I think that contributed to some of the early struggles. So I think when Maryland sees Indiana come to College Park this weekend, they're going to see a team that's hungry to kind of get something going now here in conference play. They had a really tough schedule to start the year. They're battle tested. So it's going to be a test for Maryland as Indiana comes. Like you said, they're 15-4 right now, 1-2 in conference play, but that record doesn't really show the difficult opponents they played.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, Mike. On the other hand, they did lose to Illinois 2 out of the 3 games when they played, and I don't think that necessarily should scare Maryland on one hand, but on the other, the offense is still really really good. I mean, they're batting 298 as a team on the season. They got 5 guys hitting over 500, a ridiculous number there. Kind of resembles Maryland of last year. But the pitching has been atrocious for the Hoosiers. Over 7 ERA on the season. They have one pitcher with an ERA under 4. That is starting games. So it really has just been kind of a down year for that staff, and I'm interested to see what Maryland's offense looks like, because I think that this series is probably going to be high scoring for sure. And I think that Maryland has to put up runs on the board in order to win this one and to get back towards the top of the conference standings where Illinois and Nebraska sit right now.
It's still very early though. Like there's a bunch of series left to be play. I do think that losing to Michigan, who at the end of the season, committee's going to look at it not that strong of a team, probably eliminates any chance of them hosting a regional. They can still win the Big Ten tournament, get into the NCAA tournament, but I think hosting a regional is very unlikely at this point. They would have to had kept their Big Ten streak going.
It's tough because I feel like we look at so many other sports that Maryland's a part of in the Big Ten, and you think that they're incredibly strong and that Maryland kind of lacks behind it. Baseball is pretty much the opposite. Maryland is definitely at the forefront, but the rest of the conference isn't that strong. If we were talking about a similar scenario with a similar record and a similar streak, in pretty much most other sports, Maryland would probably host a regional if they continue that path. But it is interesting to think about that baseball just isn't quite as strong. So presents a much bigger challenge that like Maryland isn't used to with other sports.
Definitely. And as we kind of move forward throughout the season, I think it's Mike makes a really good point. I mean, last year's team won the Big Ten and won the Big Ten tournament. They didn't host a regional. It seems really unlikely that this year's team is going to replicate that, especially, they didn't play as strong of a non-conference schedule this year as they did last. So probably, still fighting for an NCAA tournament bid, but it's not going to be here in College Park. If I had to guess, team that is also not going to be playing tournament games in College Park, but their expectations are a little bit different. The softball team, previous guest Lauren Karn, took their team over into Penn State. Had a decent weekend. That again we've talked a lot about it with the softball team trying to build a culture, build a chemistry, and they have a top arm to do that. Courtney Weish, absolutely electric. I mean, 19 strikeouts and throws a complete game in extra innings, and Maryland beats Penn State 2-0 in the series finale. It was an incredible win for Maryland. It was another ranked win. Penn State's number 22 in the country. So just Courtney Weish is super impressive. And guys, I'm kind of surprised she didn't go somewhere else at the end of last season, transfer out. But she's continued to put together a stellar season and has given Karn someone to lean on in that staff.
I mean, you mentioned it, Sam. Maryland went into Penn State ranked opponent and nearly left there with a series win. Ended up going 1-2, won the first game and then lost the second 2. But the third game of the series on Sunday went 12 innings and it was a 1-0 game. I mean, Maryland held Penn State scoreless for 11 innings. So, to come away with a loss there's got to hurt. But hey, I mean, they went toe to toe and they were one run away deep into a game for taking a series win against a ranked opponent. That's a position, I wouldn't have thought this team would be in this early in the Big Ten season.
The softball team finishes off their weekend with the 1-2 weekend. They beat Penn State one time, but the biggest win over the Nittany Lions came on the men's lacrosse side. Absolutely insane game played this weekend between the Penn State and Maryland. Huge comeback for the Terps, beating number 4 Penn State. Guys, I mean, to travel out to Penn State, to come off the week that they had, and salvage kind of a terrible March, outscoring Penn State 6-1 in the final period. A super, super impressive win. And I think a win that kind of solidifies that, maybe this past month was kind of a blip, maybe. I don't know what your guys' thoughts are.
This shows the championship pedigree. This is a winning team. This is a winning program. Bounce back from a rough month like that, bounce back from a rough start to the game like that. It shows Coach Tillman still has that culture within the program.
Looking at every other game this season, when the game went into the fourth quarter, Maryland was down by 3. I pretty much thought this game was over. But this is the kind of offensive kind of firepower that they need going forward to be competitive. And there's no better way to ignite that than scoring. I think they scored 5 goals in 5 minutes to start the fourth quarter. I wouldn't quote me on that exact number, but they pretty much went off to start the fourth quarter, and that's what led them to win this game. You mentioned it, Sam. 6 straight goals in the fourth. If you can do that and you can, kind of have that mentality that this is a game, at this point in the season, it wasn't necessarily a must-win game, but you really didn't want to lose 3 in a row and just keep dropping in the rankings. So
especially in the standings,
absolutely.
Standings, because of just how limited. Only 6 teams in the Big Ten lacrosse standings, and Penn State would have been 2-0, and Maryland would have dropped to 0-2 on the year in conference. That's that can be a tough ground to make up. And they continue that path against Ohio State this week. Play them on Saturday at home. Ohio State is 1-1 in conference as well, 6-5 overall. So very similar to Maryland. The Buckeyes come to College Park, and we'll have to see kind of if that offensive performance is it the fourth, the final period team that we saw, or is it the struggles that we've seen throughout March? Which offense shows up, I think, would be the big question, and it'll continue to give us more credence to what this team exactly is. Because to be honest, guys, I don't think I really know yet kind of where this team's going to end.
Yeah, it's really hard to say. If you look at the first 4 games of the season, you think, wow, this team could win the national championship. And then you look at the next 4 games in the season and you're like, wow, I hope they make the NCAA tournament. So the next 3 games to close out the regular season are huge in deciding, where this team finishes. They finished 3-0, which I honestly think is pretty likely given, Ohio State, Rutgers, and Johns Hopkins. Those are 3 winnable games for Maryland. I mean, the thing about this team is that going into every game, just because of the roster they have, coaching, and who they're playing, they can win against any team in the country, but they have to show up, and they against certain teams that have to play perfect games. But that's the thing is, if they had lost 3 in a row here this season, it was going to be tough.
I don't know if I would just chalk Johns Hopkins up to like a definite loss or a definite win. I mean, they lost to Syracuse, who we know is really good, 13-14, lost to Navy in overtime, but then they smacked Rutgers on the road and lost to Denver by 1 goal in overtime. So I don't think you can just be like, oh yeah, Maryland's going to win. I think that game probably, it's always a big one, right? But I wouldn't be surprised if that decides the Big Ten championship.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I don't think I said it was necessarily going to be a win, but I'm saying that's definitely a winnable game for Maryland, and a game that,
for sure,
if you look, a game that they can definitely win. I mean, I think the next 2 games for both teams are going to decide how that game will go, and that rivalry is always exciting. So there have been years where you have no idea what's going to happen. It doesn't matter how they come in, how they play the first 10 games of the season.
Right, and it'll be an interesting end to the year for the Terps. The women's lacrosse team, much more solidified as kind of an elite team. But we can talk. It was kind of an up and down week, I guess you could say. They lost to Penn, and then they came back and beat. Was it number 2 ranked in the country, guys? Michigan.
At the time, yes, number 2.
At the time, in Ann Arbor, pretty incredible game. And I think we talked about championship medal with John Tillman's team. that was another sign, I think, of how good Kathy Reese's squad is. Just the ability to bounce back and kind of pull out a win there that solidifies yet again. We think this team is a national championship contender.
Yeah, but Sam, they're in the hardest part of their schedule by far to take it back. You mentioned the Penn game. It was their first time trailing all season at the half. They started off slow. It was a weird game in the rain, and they just never kind of had that offensive production. Penn limited Maryland to only 20 shots, and in the first half, Maryland really could only get anything done on offense when they were man up. So it was not a pretty game there, but I think part of it could have been that Maryland was overlooking them because they had to go to Ann Arbor to face the number 2 team in the country, Michigan, and they played a significantly better game there. They were down at the half once again, but a very strong second half performance and got their 5th ranked win in the season. That was a huge game, but they were ranked.
Second win against the number 2 ranked team in the country at the time.
That's very true. Very true. Another thing about that, after those 2 games for Maryland moved to 2nd in the rankings, and Northwestern, who Maryland is playing this weekend, moved to number 1. So whole kind of jumble of the rankings there. Maryland only drops 1 spot, but means they now have to place the number 1 team in the country. It's the 2nd week in a row they'll be in a 1-2 matchup. So obviously going to be a very exciting game. That game is in College Park on Saturday at 6 p.m. Northwestern has been dominating on offense all season. They were the preseason number 1. They've been ranked number 1 for 5 weeks. They're averaging 17.7 goals per game. It's kind of like what we talked about, where that number is super inflated because of some of the teams they played at the beginning of the season. But it's once again going to come down to how that Maryland defense plays. They did it against Michigan. They did it against James Madison. But I think Northwestern is a different beast. And my honest prediction is that Maryland will lose this game.
Northwestern kind of had Maryland's number last year, too, if we remember. They went into Evanston with a chance to win the Big Ten and came out with a loss. So, Brendan, even just a big picture question real quick. Say, pending the result on Saturday against the Wildcats, do you think that this team, this version of Kathy Reese's squad is suited offensively? We've seen the struggles, but how good they are defensively. Do you think they're suited to win a national championship? I know that's a big question, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you have to say yes. If you look at the teams that they've beat, I mean, this team really, the Penn game was odd and they lost that game. But other than that, I mean, they played pretty much every team right down to the end, and they have 2 losses. But yeah, this team can absolutely win a national championship because the defense is good enough and Emily Sterling is good enough. And that's what it comes down to. Is we saw it in the James Madison game, and we saw in the Michigan game, holding Michigan to 6 goals and holding James Madison to 8. If you can do that against some of the best offenses in the country, Maryland's offense has been good enough to outscore however else they've played. When Maryland's let up more than 10 goals, they've lost. So it comes down to the defense.
And as we move past women's lacrosse, another elite team here in the spring, we're going to re-talk back about the winter because we have some transfer news. Real quick, we'll just hit on them. Guys, I got to ask you a question. What do you think is the biggest transfer news to come out of the men's basketball and women's basketball cycle here, whether that's someone entering or someone exiting? Both sides, combined, which player is the most important?
I'd probably say Riley Nelson. Recent news just came out today. Was a number 18, I think, ranked prospect heading into the past season. Obviously tore her ACL. The season didn't go the way she wanted to, but it's another big-time prospect that, adding on to Angel Reese, probably not the same prominence, but, another undergrad transferring to a different program under Freese is somewhat of a pattern we've seen recently, and I'm not sure if it's just because Freese doesn't play freshmen, if it's a way with Angel Reese's transfer, is it a coaching style that players aren't enjoying? But it's become somewhat of a pattern that players are leaving the women's basketball program, and it does seem apparent that Freese and the coaching staff is on the recruiting trail heavy right now this offseason to try to get some incoming transfers. But it's definitely a concerning trend.
Yeah, real quick, just to touch on what Mike said. Since the 2019 summer, Maryland has lost 13 players to the transfer portal. 7 of those 13 scored 10 or more points at their new home. You guys want to hear some of the teams that they transferred to? LSU, Virginia Tech, and then Penn State, NC State, Syracuse, Ole Miss, and Ohio State. I believe all but like one or two of those teams made the NCAA tournament this weekend. So they're not just losing players who, like last offseason, right? Gia Cook, Ava Sciola, and Mila Reynolds left. None of those players are really going to make an impact. But over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of high-level contributors that would have played a big role at Maryland that left. And I expect Riley Nelson to pretty much, I don't think she's going to be like South Carolina level transfer, but I do think that she's going to have a high list of suitors in the portal. And I think Mike makes a really good point. I don't necessarily know. I don't know if I agree that Brenda Friese's style rubs off because she's pulling players in, but something about Maryland, and I guess it's my job to figure out what, is making some high level contributors leave, and they got to figure that out, whatever that is, because Faith leaving, Faith Masonis, I think was kind of a mutual parting of ways. She wanted to go figure out a spot to earn a degree and, play a bigger role, whatever that may be. Summer Bostic leaving, same idea. Riley Nelson, from all accounts, I do not think was it's probably best for both sides to move on. She was going to play a pretty big role next year if I had to guess. So it's a pretty damning blow to Maryland.
I'll answer the first question you asked quickly. The biggest news, I think, I'll keep it on the women's side. I think Faith Masonis leaving is kind of the biggest news. She's been in College Park for 5 years. She has an extra year of eligibility. It would have been her 6th year, kind of truly solidified herself as one of the probably best known Maryland women's basketball players of all time if she'd been in College Park for 6 years. So I thought that was a pretty big blow in just terms of a culture person there. But kind of what you talked about, Sam, it's hard to know really why so many freshmen are leaving, especially if you look at the past 2 years. There's 4 transfers coming in that we already know about, and there are 3 freshmen coming in. But is it even worth talking about them? I mean, they're probably going to be gone next year. That's happened the past 2 years. So I don't know. I've looked at the freshmen who are coming in, and 3 very solid players, but I don't know if it really matters. It's hard to say how many minutes they're really going to get. And I think overall the loss of Angel Reese, I mean, the fact that she could still be on this Maryland roster to me is always just, that has to be the biggest blow to the team in the past 3-4 years.
I do want to push back a little on the Angel narrative because I agree that obviously Angel Reese is an elite player. But that season was so weird from everything I've heard. And you should go check out Varun's article in the Diamondback about kind of what went down. But there were so many comments that Brenda's saying this is a we first locker room instead of a me first locker room. I think that's just Brenda's opinion, is that she's very team centered, team oriented. I don't know Angel Reese, so I'm not going to say whether, it's the same thing. But there were pointed comments made about some of the players that transferred that I think probably was more about a culture fit than the caliber of player leaving, if that makes any sense, right? And to be fair, they went to the Elite Eight after that season. So, it's not like they're not still doing well. But I agree, Brendan. Especially freshman guards, they're like Kendall Walker next year was the Post All-Met Player of the Year. She needs to be on the floor. And if she's not, there's going to be teams that are reaching out to her being like, hey, come down. We can give you a big role. I don't know. It's interesting. And we'll have to see kind of what those guard minutes look like next year now that Nelson's gone. I love that you two chose women's basketball because, it's a sport I cover, but I'm actually going to disagree with you. I think Jacoby Gillespie was the biggest addition for either side. This guy's a stud. I mean, I said this to somebody. I think he's going to be a much bigger, less hype, much bigger addition than Derek Queen is. And maybe that's a hot take, but this kid, he's efficient. He plays the exact role that Maryland needs. I think him and DHS are actually going to work really, really well next to each other, much better than him and Jameer did. And I just think that this type of pickup, I mean, he was Sam Vecini's 7th ranked transfer portal addition. His numbers rival and sometimes exceed Jameer Young's. So I love this addition. I think the Belmont guard's going to be awesome this year.
The big thing that sticks out to me is the 38% from 3. We're seeing Willard last offseason, media day, he was talking about this emphasis on being big, being physical, to be able to compete in the Big Ten. didn't really work out when the only real big addition was Jordan Geronimo. You saw that lack of shooting. Now it seems like Willard's kind of going back into the shooting route, bringing in Gillespie, looking at a bunch of other guards. I know we've talked about the Harvard guard with the Maryland tattoo. What's his name?
Malik Mack. But
Malik Mack.
he's not coming here. But it's good that they're in the portal, like looking for him.
Why wouldn't he come here?
Because he's got his list of suitors, and now Maryland has a point guard. Like, I just, it seems unrealistic at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's still somebody Maryland, I assume, will still be trying to recruit, despite the fact that he, is unlikely to come here. I think if you look at the roster as a whole next year, we haven't talked about it yet, but Jamie Kaiser transferred out, and we said it on the same for the women's side. It's so hard for freshmen to make an impact across the NCAA. If you look at the number of freshmen, I can probably name them on one hand who had really impactful seasons across the entire NCAA and were huge additions to their team. And so it's hard to know. I'm obviously not in the position of being a freshman basketball player at any school. I'll never be in that position. So I don't know what it's like. But to me, it seems like a lot of them coming with these huge expectations that this is now going to be, their shining spotlight, and they don't play. And then they're just like, all right, I'll go somewhere else and see what happens. So it's really, I think, hard to know what will happen with any of the freshmen that come in. And, it just seems like people are trading semi-equal talent from school to school for pretty much no reason. I don't know why you wouldn't want to develop unless you have a serious problem with the coach or the program or the area.
Hakeem Art averaged 1.6 points per game his freshman season here at Maryland. He was one of the biggest contributors to that first season under Willard. It was probably, one of the biggest losses of the past offseason for that Maryland team. It takes time to develop, and like Brendan said, it just seems like a lot of unnecessary trading.
Yeah, definitely. But that's the era of college sports we're in, and Maryland's going to try to make some more additions, assuredly. Probably have a spot now at the 4, and another guard is, I think, who Willard's looking at.
Yeah. Do you guys, looking at the Maryland roster right now, do you see anybody else leaving? Transferring out?
I think that probably Kaiser was the one name that probably was up in the air.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we saw Ian Martinez leave on the last day last year. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? I think Maryland fans would like to think you were correct, Sam, but really, who knows? And maybe Willard has different ideas. I think it's always hard now when you have these scholarship spots that are kind of locked up, and the fact that you can go pick talent from other places, that it's kind of like, the coach can kind of force you out. So we'll see what happens. And that Martinez transfer always kind of sticks out to me from last year is, you never know what's going to happen at the end of the portal.
Yeah, no, it's the era is different. Guys can transfer in and then leave again. So it's basically free agency, but we've talked a lot about it and it gets talked about exhaustively. So that's enough on the portal. But one thing that is pretty much exclusive to Under the Shell, I think, right? Mike, is there any other podcast that you know of that does Terrific Terp as well as we do, at least?
Under the Shell exclusive.
We did Gene Shu last week. This week we have a different name, and he was never on a roster at the University of Maryland. An interesting one. B, take it away.
That's absolutely right, Sam. I know my mother will love this one. I didn't pick it for her, but I know that she knows who this is, and she'll be super happy.
Shout out Mrs. Weissel, baby.
This person, absolutely. All right. Despite never being on a roster at the University of Maryland, this athlete is ranked number 1 in the world at singles and doubles and has been for multiple years. This week's Terrific Terp is Ben Johns, and he is considered to be the greatest pickleball player of all time. Johns grew up in Laytonsville, Maryland, about 40 minutes from campus, and is the middle child of 7. Johns came to the University of Maryland despite being homeschooled throughout high school. He got his start in racket sports playing tennis and table tennis from his childhood, and he helped his brother Colin in the pro tennis circuit. That's really where he got his start. Ben and Colin now play doubles together in pickleball. Ben began playing pickleball professionally in 2016 at a tournament in Florida, and a year later, he won a gold medal in the men's pro singles at the U.S. Open. Since then, Ben has been dominant and has been at the head of the movement across the United States. Since Johns began playing, the sport has grown significantly in popularity, which has led Ben and his brother to launch an instructional video service in 2021 and other services to help players improve and enjoy the game. At the University of Maryland, Ben was on the club tennis team, and he studied material science and engineering. Much of his professional career came while he was at the University of Maryland. Johns has been the number one player in singles, doubles, and mixed doubles for the majority of his career. In 2019, he went on a 108-match winning streak, currently has over 80 PPA titles. While pickleball isn't a Division I sport yet, Johns has been dominating the movement and a player that will be in the conversation for years to come. And he's this week's Terrific Terp.
Excellent job. Pickleball, I'm just going to say I'm schooling any of you on the pickleball court, frankly. No chance.
You've got a lot of experience in your belt.
No, I don't, but I'm just taking myself. Betting on
If
myself.
we get a fourth, let's go to Epley. See what happens.
Yeah, let's do it. Who can we bring on as a fourth? We got two bosses at Testudo Times. This will be a test to see if they listen all the way through. Emmett or Andrew, one of you has experience. We'll bring you onto the court.
Whoever hears this first between the two of them gets to play.
Or Colin. Don't forget about Colin.
Very
Colin
true.
Colin as well. So that'll wrap up this week's Under the Shell. Great interview with Jimmy Jackson. Some really fun topics. Spring season's fully underway, and we're doing the best we can to cover it all. You can find us at Under the Shell on Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, and Apple as well. Wherever you get your podcast, we're there for you. YouTube now too, and that's been doing well. So you can check us out at all those spots. Follow our Twitters as well to get your Maryland content. And yeah, as we head into Final Four weekend, Maryland will not be participating, but we have lots of ranked matchups. So pay attention, listen Under the Shell, and you'll get all your Terp content that you need. So from all the Under the Shell boys, have a good rest of your night.
Guess what? You've got Under the Shell Podcast. Nobody does it better.